Alrighty, it is 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and we'll call the meeting to order. I need a motion to declare this an open meeting.
Make the motion to declare it open meeting.
Second.
I'm gonna give that to Bobby. Motion by JW, second by Bobby to declare it open meeting. Roll call, Bobby,
Yes.
Corey is absent, Hope,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Jason, yes, JW.
Yes.
Motion carried. We welcome the visitors to the meeting tonight. As per law, the Board of Education does adhere to the Open Meeting Act, and a copy of that act is posted to the wall to my right. This meeting has been properly advertised according to policy and the Nebraska Open Meetings Act. Item 3 on our agenda is the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second it.
A motion by Mary, second by Hope. Are there any questions or any discussion?
I don't have any.
Okay.
No.
Do you guys have any questions? We'll go ahead and move on then. Tori is absent. Hope,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Jason, yes. JW,
Yes.
and Bobby.
Yes.
Motion is carried. Public comment or correspondence. At this time, we'll open the floor to public comment. As per board policy, we will allow up to 5 minutes per speaker with a maximum total of allowed time for public comment not to exceed 30 minutes. Anybody? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to old business. We'll receive a presentation from engineer Greg Call regarding the HVAC needs assessment and discuss and consider any actions pertaining to the report.
I'll share with Mary.
I've got an extra one.
Thanks. So, I did a walkthrough. I'm familiar with the systems at school to begin with. Some of them, unfortunately, are the same as when I went to school. So really, the question came up with the main gym, and you had a couple of bids over the summer, and actually it goes all the way back to February. The quote from Ruts Heating and Air of basically $382,000 to provide cooling and heating in rooftops to the gym. And $60,000 of that was a new boiler to take care of fan coil units that you have in the building. Out of that, you have fan coil units in the gym area, especially in the locker area. They don't work. They've been kind of rigged, a couple of them, to provide heat. It's probably not the proper thing to do, and can cause other issues. But for now, they're providing heat, and especially the storage kind of / office in the back corner on the northwest side of the gym. I don't know if you've ever walked down there and taken a look. A couple of you know what's going on there. Some of those fan coil units, there's 6 of them that essentially they identified that they need to be, have the motors replaced probably, or replace the whole fan coil unit. That is not in this quote. Rutt's quote was low at $382,000, and that's one of the items to discuss. Grunwald Mechanical had a quote for 4 10-ton cooling units, rooftop units to cool the gym, but they were only cooling only, and then they also had in their cost to repair the 2 large fan coil units, one on each, the north side, right by the doors, and one at the south side, right by the doors, to repair those units, replace the fan motors in them to get them working again, and they use hot water for heating. In their costs, they also had water heater quoted, indirect gas fired to provide heat for the building. Their total came to $457,000 and some change. Now, the plans were originally done by AES Engineering in 2021. And looking at those older, looking at that system or or looking at a system to provide cooling for the gym. In my opinion, if you provided rooftop units, whether it's Grunwald or Ruts Heating and Air, the most common rooftop unit out there, especially in this size, comes with heat. So you're getting a heat exchanger and you're using it, or you're getting a heat exchanger and you're not using it. Okay, Grunwalds, they typically, they're fitters. I've known them for a long time. I know the owner. They do fitting work. They like boilers. They're boiler guys. And so it's just sort of a different mentality. If it were me, I'd provide, and I wanted cooling in the gymnasium, I'd provide cooling, I'd provide the rooftop units. Now, does Pawnee City need 40 tons of cooling in their gym? That's one question, okay? And I'll address that in a second. My opinion to that is probably not 40 tons. You could get by with two 15-ton units, but one of the problems with that would be weight of the units. They already, in the plans, there's already some structural modifications. So going with 10-ton units, it kind of spreads it out. You could probably, it would probably make a noticeable difference if you went with two 10-ton units. And the reason why I say that is I provided cooling to several gymnasiums for Columbus Public Schools recently. And I think the largest middle school there, we provided 25 tons of cooling. And they didn't complain, right? Their largest middle school is probably larger than our high school. Just saying, just giving a comparison. You could always provide probably half the cooling. And then if you needed the other cooling, like 2 corner units, provide half the cooling as on the plans. And if you decided you needed additional cooling, you could always add the other 2 units in the future to save costs now and do a project that's half the cost essentially. You still need to do something with the boiler system, and Ruts Heating and Air in their bid, they did provide a boiler replacement. That's at $60,000 that I added to that. And that was $382,000. Now, we could go out for quotes, and Brian and I discussed that. And the reason why I was bringing that up first is because I know the school has wanted air conditioning in the gym for a long time, and you're probably the last one in the region not to have air conditioning, right? So, I mean, I wanted air conditioning when I was here. Believe me. So I understand that. So I also asked, there's a question in those bids and kind of like pointing fingers, I think, between the contractors and as to whether or not Ruts was providing appropriate bid due to the electrical requirements. I had a electrical engineer that I work with on projects. In fact, worked with them in Columbus Public Schools, Hastings Public Schools. We recently did 200 tons of cooling for their high school project over the summer. Jeff and I worked together closely. He came down and checked everything out, and he basically said, yep, what Ruts has proposed would work, okay? So you have options with the gym. Now, there's other areas of concern in I know you've been spending money here and there to fix them, and Brian has been dealing with it. And so we'll go on to talk about those systems, and mainly it's the high school VRF. The high school VRF over the last 8 years, you've spent $140,000 in repairs, okay? It's $17,500 per year. You basically have a budget item. That value is only going to go up, and I'll get into the reasons why in a second. Last fall, the boilers were replaced, cost $310,000 with new high-efficiency boilers in, I was here, the old locker room. That's why I put it in quotes. So, I remember using that locker room. That's how old I am. So, the old locker room, the reason why I put that kind of at the top is that's significant. And I'll talk to you about the VRF system. Initially, the replacement, when it first started to fail, VRF systems, when they first came out, basically 15, 20 years ago, You know, new things since sliced bread, right? And the HVAC industry gave a cheap option for schools such as this school district to go ahead and provide cooling, right? And they promised both heating and cooling. You know, hey, you get your cake and eat it too. But what they didn't tell anybody is they still designed the compressors to last the same amount of time. So on a typical condensing unit like you'd find in your home, right? You have your furnace inside, your condensing unit outside, it's connected to a coil on top of the furnace, provides you with cooling, okay? Those systems last 15 to 20 years, okay? When you run them 24/7, they last half that, if you're lucky. And in the wintertime, they scream to provide the heat. In other words, they're running full out to create enough friction to provide enough heat to pull heat from the air as well to basically pump it back into school. And when they do that, those systems start to fail at 7.5 years, is what they found out over time. So 7.5 to 10 years, those systems start failing. The system that you have was one of the first trained systems that was out there. And that system is being phased out of their I want to say, product list. And as such, it's becoming harder and harder to find parts, okay? Now, to find a part, it's basically the one thing that fails the most is these electronic expansion valves. So that's the double EV valve, right? And they'll say, oh, that's expansion valve. Well, those are the ones that allow the modulation to provide enough heating or cooling when that zone, that cassette in that room kicks on, right? Thermostat tells it needs cooling, and that's what it opens up or closes down. The valve itself isn't that expensive. It's the labor that's killing you. So overall cost of that per call is around $900, right? And in the next, they had trouble finding replacement parts this year for those. Next year, there's no guarantee. I mean, you know, they might find them online, somebody might be selling them, somebody might be getting rid of the system, replacing their system, whatever. So you end up with used valves, right, that last even less and cost the same amount as a new valve to be installed, okay? That's one of the downsides of that. In addition to those problems with VFR cassettes, there were 12 of them replaced in 2017. You have coils in the fan coil units throughout the building that leak refrigerant. That's why the cassettes were replaced in 2017, probably because those coils were leaking. The inverter boards and the compressors on your main condensing units on the southeast corner were failing, or we had a failure this last summer. All of the piping has had some corrosion here and there, okay? I talked to Ruts maintenance personnel. They said that initially they were having trouble even like getting these sealed up. They initially used a new piping system on these units when they were installed. Again, best thing since sliced bread. They were brazeless compression fittings, okay? Typically, and I mean, the promise was, hey, this fitting's gonna work, it's not gonna leak. And that's like somebody going and installing a new PEX piping system in your home. It's plastic, do you no harm. Probably want the copper at the end of the day. I mean, plastics, we know, you get microplastics in the water now. They can cause cancer or be carcinogenic, like that type of thing. It's kind of the same thing with this piping system, except it's for refrigerant. And when you used, they used steel fittings, they didn't use brass couplers. So the steel coupled to the brass connections on your cassettes and fan coils in each room corrode, right? So the similar metals, there's a corrosion issue, right, Mary? You know all about that. You get into science class, but I don't think y'all need one. I did love science class. But that's one of the other problems. You have all these fittings around and they're failing. The fittings are failing. Now, Ruts came up with this sealant that actually they've sealed most of your fittings up for now. They're not leaking, but they will leak again as they corrode more because it's still steel fitting to a copper fitting. It will still continue to corrode. If a new system is installed, I'd recommend that you use proper refrigerant piping and tubing throughout. That's all copper and braze fittings, right? I mean, if they install a system at your house, they're gonna use braze fittings. They just are. They're not gonna solder it. That's gonna create problems later. So that's a couple of the issues that's going on at the high school. Now, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. The good deal about this is the high school, you replace the boilers, which means that you can still install a VRF system, and it's still one of the least expensive systems out there to install. But it would be, you'd have to replace the existing. You'd replace all the cassettes, you'd install an in-piping system, you connect it with new VRF condensing units, and then below 40 degrees outside, we set up the system where it locks down. It no longer is able to provide cooling, because really below 40, you don't need cooling inside the building. They can open a window. And you're, sorry about that. Let me mute this. And your heating system can take over. Your radiant pipe heating system, that works to heat your building. And that's why we can set that up to lock it out. Now, I know that system works, because about the same time that you installed the VRF system here, originally, I think 2011, I installed a VRF system for Catholic Mutual. But on their VRF system, I installed boilers. And so I lock out their system at 40 degrees so that VRF never provides heat. It can provide heat in an emergency. Say your boilers failed and you needed heat, you could override the system to provide heat, which is awesome, and they can do the same thing. But they, their system locks that VRF out, so all it provides is cooling, and they truly get their 20 years out of their condensing system, right? So that's kind of what's going on at the high school. Now the cost and the estimated cost to replace that, I would estimate it at around $680,000. Now, I know Ruts provided a price in this year, beginning of the year, they're around $580,000. And the only reason I inflated it to 680 is because, well, and maybe things will be less expensive now that Trump's in office, but you never know, right? I mean, we won't know for a few years or a few months, and typically at the end of the year, all manufacturers, they apply their price increases, right? So I added 15% just to be safe, okay? So in front of you, you right now have two systems. One is very desirable, that's dealing with the gym. The other one, you probably wouldn't have to do anything with, but you're gonna limp along if you don't. And you're gonna, the $17,500 is going to increase every year. That price is just gonna go up. And in 10 years, that's $170,000. And that's not including time value of money, so probably $200,000. I'm just saying. My math. I was actually pretty good at math. So it's probably in the ballpark is what it's gonna cost over 10 years. Maybe even close to $250. If you were a bank and you're charging compounding interest, you probably get a nice around $250,000 out of it.
That's if you can find parts.
That's if you can find parts, and that's the big problem, right? The future parts that will be on the market will be used parts. And those will fail even faster, and you're still paying the same as you would for a used part as you would a new part, because now it's like black market. I mean, you got a guy on the phone, he's making phone calls all day to find out, hey, if the guy on eBay listed those parts, did somebody else pick them up first? So it ends up, there's nothing, as my brother says, and he's so right, I can get into this all day long, but he told me, Greg, it's never cheaper than today. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? But he's right. It's never less expensive than today, right, to do something. Whether you're buying a new system, or buying a new car, whatever. Next year, the year after, those prices always increase. Those are your two main costs. So you're looking at around, and if we rebid that out for the rooftop units on the gym, we could get that down, in my opinion, because I honestly, 20 tons of cooling it's not tons and tons, right? But what the engineers do, and I'm one of them, and I'm guilty as everybody, is we look at the capacity of your gym, and then we apply the amount of outside air required for that capacity of people, because code says we need to. And we then size the equipment. Well, the capacity of the gym had probably only reached capacity, I think probably when one of my nephews was here and they were playing basketball. And they went to state that year, right? And you reach capacity a couple times and you're essentially in the wintertime. The other time you meet capacity at your gym is in the spring at graduation. And that's only momentarily, right, for a couple hours. So people who've been used to, they prepare themselves to be hot at graduation. They do. And so I get it, but 20 tons of cooling would certainly help that. 30 tons is probably where you're really at. But like I said, if you wanted to rebid that work, you could have them rebid it. We could put out a package, tell them to rebid 2 units instead of 4 units. Tell them to fix the fan coil units and provide the boiler so you could provide the fan coil units and then address the room at the same time. That would be my first recommendation if you wanted to deal with the gym. If you wanted to deal with the high school, my second recommendation would be to replace the VRF. This is never cheaper than today. You're going to have problems, and you're going to have problems finding parts. So as you have more and more problems finding parts, they'll just stop working. They'll shut that unit off, they'll shut the next unit off, and so on and so forth. And you'll be out of the system entirely. That's what's going to happen there. Now, the good news, so not always bear bad news, is but that's part of my job. This is very bad news. The elementary building has 4 Daikin furnace and condensing units. They're in pretty good working order that were replaced in 2022. They're controlled by 2 thermostats, which kind of creates some discomfort. There's probably some modifications that could be done there to improve that further, but it would cost more money. And for now, they do provide the cooling, but they provide the cooling one half or the other half, depending on where that thermostat's located. So you're going to have teachers with some discomfort, and administration is going to get complaints out of that. The shop building has new RTU installed in 2022. It has a new mini split, serves the classroom space. I left out classroom in this, it just says space. But that space also has a furnace as a backup. Nothing really needs to be done there. 2011, the fitness center, those units are original. You gotta be considering replacing those. But if you're saving money and not replacing, $17,500 a year, you can replace those units in a couple of years because you're not spending money elsewhere on maintenance. Because those typically have a 20-year life. Like your home unit, everybody, my home unit just went out. It's like, it's a piece of mechanical equipment that if you run it all the time, it will fail. They're designed to fail. It's like, paying for another TV service. You gotta make that payment every month. Everybody wants the recurring payment in the business. That's why cars fail. Cars have parts that fail for the same reason. Thank goodness, though, that most equipment manufacturers make these units still at 20-year life expectancy, and that's not going to change. There's no reason to change the type of unit you're using. I'm just pointing out that, in the next 5 years, you're going to have to do something with the fitness unit building units. Press box recently installed, nothing needs to be done. Admin building, 4 furnaces. They're Daikin units plus 1 train furnace. I think only the train furnace needs to be replaced. Brian, I think you had that scheduled.
Yeah,
So,
just whenever Dave has a free minute
Right.
before he retires.
right. So, is there any questions for me? Now, I didn't actually write what my recommendation is, but I can do that and send it all you in an email to all of you.
Can I make one clarification?
Yes.
The 310,000 for the boilers also included the RTUs for the auditorium. And I think that's 5, maybe?
On which one?
Existing high school.
The very first sentence.
Oh, yeah. The 310,000 was the new boilers.
Plus plus the RTUs for the auditorium.
Oh, yeah, that was plus the RTUs for the auditorium. That is correct. So, you did have that. And there's something in the auditorium that just bothers me, and I gotta say it, because that's what I do. I think there's return duct that they pushed into the building a little bit. You can cut that back at the wall. I mean, it kind of looks ugly. I mean, you have that cut at the wall, it worked just fine.
Is that the one we painted?
Yes.
Yeah.
It used to go all the way across, it was really ugly.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, we could, I mean,
It's not return though, is it? It's actually air
It's
coming in.
it's an
The
actual
returns
supply.
are back on the wall.
Yeah, you could actually probably even cut the supply off at the wall. And the reason I say that is because a friend of mine, he's got a big building, lives out on an acreage, he's got a big building where he put in a gymnasium. And he just piped one up high and shoots the air straight out and returns down low, and it works all day long. And it cools the whole. And it's a bigger space than the auditorium. So I'm just saying there's something you could look even better.
Yeah.
And if we had a contractor on board, I'd probably just tell him to do it. I'll just say it. You know, I could probably talk him into it, you know.
One clarification, the bids that we have from Rutt and Grunwald haven't been solicited through the formal bid process. So if we did want to solicit bids, we would have to either do a hard bid with just a spec sheet and just a traditional bid, or some variation of that, like a design build or a contractor at risk.
Yes.
Yes. I had a question. So how much do you think, you may have said this and I may have missed it, how much by reducing the tonnage for the gym, how much cost do you think that might save?
It would be on the initial pricing, it was 322,000. So most of that is your rooftop unit, so you're probably looking at 150,000.
Really?
Yeah, maybe if you want to be conservative, because I like being conservative, I'd say 100,000, but you're going to reduce it probably $100,000.
Could the, shifting gears a little bit here, could the VRF system be done in phases?
Yes, you can always do it in phases. So we could leave we could put the new condensing units right next to the old, and we could let the original ones, run. But I would do it in a 50% capacity. And the reason why I would do that is because you get into a problem with the size of the unit to serve multiple cassettes throughout the building. And that would allow you to install one, get it up and running, and then the next year do the other one. So yes, you could do it. I mean, I wouldn't do it in more than 2 phases because of that.
Okay.
Because capacity for the condensing units becomes an issue at that point. Does that make sense?
I believe currently it's 3 different sections, or loops as I sometimes call them.
Yeah, there might be, and you could do it in the 3 loops then.
I'm just trying to think of a way to reduce the upfront cost and finance it over multiple years.
It's never less expensive than today. And I'll say also, when you do that, I mean, there's gonna be mobilization costs that they add on the front end for every job. So instead of the 680, you're gonna add $100,000, maybe 150 to the project. You're gonna go the other way. No, I'm not in charge of mobilization costs. That's some of the contractors do. I'm just saying it's a real cost.
If you did it in phases, you know, especially if you did it in like 3 phases, but you're getting 3.
What do you mean? Oh, you think the equipment would be different?
Would it?
You wouldn't be able to bid it out if you did it in phases, because you're gonna be locked into that type of equipment.
Okay.
So you're after the first, your first contract, you're gonna be stuck with that contractor installing the next 2.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you could work with them to install, that over a 3-year period, but then again, you're gonna get more money out of the deal, for sure. I mean, it goes back to that, never less expensive than it is today. And believe me, I had problems with my brother when he said that. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? He's very clear about it, and he's right. I mean, so it's a matter of what you want to do, when you want to do it. Right now, you have a heating system for the high school again, right? But I'd say over the next probably 3 years, you're not going to have a cooling system for your high school. Because again, it's going to be harder to find parts.
You say they usually last 7.5 to 10 years, correct? This is
Yeah, when they're heating and cooling.
Those
So-
last 20.
Right, right. So like your condensing unit at your house, right, lasts 20 years, but you only run it in the summertime, right? And the furnace itself, the heat exchanger in the furnace, essentially lasts 15, 20 years as well, but you only run that in the wintertime. Now you have a system in place at the high school where you have a boiler system. The boiler is the main heart of that system was replaced. And you have the heating and cooling for your auditorium space already taken care of. Now you're looking at what do you do with the cooling side. Now, I went round and round with this types of systems. And when I say round and round types of systems at Hastings High School, they were looking at the least cost expensive systems to install, to provide what they need, and that's really they need to cool their school. We went around and around with heat pumps, we went around with fan coil units, we priced both out, we priced out VRFs. The problem with our VRFs is we always were having to add heat. We had to add hot water heating, another system. They have steam in their high school. Or we had to add electric resistance. Well, electric resistance they couldn't add because they didn't have enough electrical service, which would be the same type of problem you would have here if we added that much electric KW heating to the VRF cassettes. And so what we ended up with there was, we're like, okay, well, how do we get heat without, and use the VRF, but without running the VRF in the wintertime? We ended up going with the geothermal VRF. So, the beauty of that was that we don't have an air-to-air heat pump that's screaming. Essentially, they oversize your VRF condensing units, and the manufacturers do this, so they can get more heat out of them than really you should be able to get out of an air source heat pump, right? Your air source heat pump for your home really doesn't do much good 20 degrees or less. And you need a backup, either gas heater or electric furnace at that point, okay? The VRF, they sold it to everybody in the nation and across the world. Oh, we can get more heat out of it by oversizing these compressors and the condensers and et cetera, and letting the thing really scream in agony as it dropped below 20 degrees into the negative or 0 degrees area. And that really burns up those compressors. It burns up the modules, it burns up the equipment. And so they're really running all out for, I'd say, a good third of the winter time. And that's where they're really burning their life. And that's why they only last 7.5 years if you use them in both heating and cooling. In cooling only, not a problem. They'll cool great. They actually are very quiet in cooling because they're so oversized for the heating mode that they just kind of run nice and easy in the summertime and provide the cooling that's necessary.
And you, I don't know if you said it tonight, but when we talked, didn't you say you'd lock them out at 40 degrees?
Yes, yes. I'd lock them out at 40 degrees and I'd let the boilers provide your heat. Absolutely.
And the boilers we have are in good shape.
Yeah, the boilers especially the high school are in really good shape. Yeah. It's a newer system, it's a year old. We should have
So that's a lot of money. That's more money than we have.
Yeah, it's always a lot of money. And it's a matter of how you want to go about it. Do one project now, do one project in a couple of years from now. You could let and I don't know how you want to do it. That's up to you. You could replace the high school system now and still essentially be where you were, except in a better place because you're not going to spend in the 17.5. And next year it's probably going to be a couple thousand more than that, right? And it's just going to increase exponentially after that. So, but there is some, the gymnasium certainly needs some attention for sure. So if you didn't do it all now, I mean, I would consider doing it within the next year or two for sure.
So financially, this was from a few months ago, but it hasn't changed a lot. I think we've got about 40,000 more, maybe 30,000 more than what this shows. But this kind of shows what our cash reserve situation was at that time. It's better than it's been in the 9 years I've been here in terms of total. When I started in 2016, we pretty much had nothing. You know, our mill is 36,000 a penny, so you're not generating a lot of cash off of the levy and building fund. And then, of course, we transfer into depreciation. We kind of use depreciation a little more regularly to buy buses and those sort of things, especially when it's in the front end of the budget cycle, to protect make sure that we don't dig into our general fund cash reserve too much. But the building fund, we've pretty much just been putting a penny or two in here and there for the last 9 years. And other than using it as a revolving fund for the ESSER projects, that money's all been put back in. And so it's $500,000 in this economy isn't a lot of money, but it takes a long time to get $500,000 when you're only putting a penny or two in. And so we've slowly been doing that for the last 9 years. We've got about a little over 900,000 in the bank, and these were my projections of how that money might get spent over the next 6-7 years, and how much I think I budgeted an additional 450,000 in terms of transfers into depreciation, and these are just guesses, and then an additional 250,000 into building fund. So if we were going to spend that kind of money, we'd certainly have to come up with a way to fund it. QC Puff is always an option. Not advocating for that necessarily, but where we just paid off the QC Puff bond, that would be an option. I haven't done extensive research on it. I know the rules have changed, and then they've changed again on what qualifies and what doesn't qualify for a QC Puff bond. 5 cents, does that sound right, Greg? I think you can put up to 5 cents on the levy for up to 10 years worth of financing on a project of that nature.
And the reason why I'm not recommending like what we did at Hastings, the well field there cost $1 million for the 200 ton.